Welcome, I'm Darren, and today I'll be talking about the worst card designs in the 1980s. Now, the 80s are an interesting time for card designs because they had some really good card designs and they had some real bummers. But it was an interesting time to see the evolution of card design just prior to the big launch of the 1990s. And the cards tended to start pretty poorly, and they did really well in the middle section of the decade, and then they kind of faded off a bit at the end. So it's interesting to see how the cards evolved. But for a 90s guy like myself, I look back at these cards and they were always old cards, and they always kind of seemed old. And over time, I began to really learn how to appreciate these cards. So I'm going to be looking at the cards that really didn't gain my appreciation, that still just are kind of funky creations. And I'm going to be looking primarily specifically at the three main sports: football, basketball, and baseball. And I'm going to be looking at major releases, so I'm not going to be looking at Star, and I'm not going to be looking at Fleer football. I'm also not going to be looking at inserts. I'm not going to be looking at subsets, so no rookie cards specifically. These are just the regular player cards. And the idea is, if you were going to get a card of a specific player and you weren't concerned with price, you just wanted to get a really good looking card, what are the card designs you really don't want to be getting? And I'm going to be looking at the top 5, although for me it's going to end up being the top 7 because I got a tie for 5th place. None of these cards fully pull ahead of the others. And it's really the front of the cards I'm looking at, because in the case of almost all these cards, the backs really are quite nice. So let's see what these cards are. So the first card I'm going to talk about in the tie for 5th place is 1988 Score Baseball. This card is almost kind of like a cheat in a way. This is a card that was a very innovative card. Again, the back looks very nice, and it was one of the most important card designs in the history of sports cards, because it really launched us forward into a new era of sports card design. The problem was, it was their first release, and they hadn't fully figured out how to make a card that could hold up over the years. So it's a bold color design, and there's some elements in it that are designed to be kind of interesting, but they just get lost. The color is too bold, and the color variations are too minor, and it just kind of sinks together into one big color theme, a very, very, very bold color theme around what's often a really good picture. So the problem that this card has is that the border is too dominant, and you got to look past the border to see the picture. And when you get multiple cards together, the borders they all fight each other. And I'm not going to say it's a letdown. It was their first try, and let's face it, 89 Pro Set isn't very good either. But the fact that the card design is basically just way too much color on the outside causes this card to suffer. But again, the pictures are good, the card stock is good, and the background is good. So I can't leave it out of this list, but I can't fully include it. It's kind of borderline. And the next card in this tie for 5 is 83 Topps Football. And 83 Topps Football is actually a pretty decent design. I don't mind it. I think it's pretty good. And with the right picture, these cards look good on an individual basis. The problem is when you go through a couple of these cards, then the stenciled design work in it becomes kind of anemic. It just kind of fades away, and the cards are designed so that there's kind of a boldness to it. But the boldness only happens on an individual basis, and after a couple of cards, the frequency of the picture changing dominates over the stenciling in the card, and you no longer really see the name on the top. And so these cards are just under-designed, and it's a real letdown. It should be a good card, and if it was in the 70s, this would be a great card, but it's a card design that showed up a little bit too late. It was the wrong era for this type of approach, and I have it on here because it's just too much of a letdown. It's the best of these 3 cards, but it's the biggest letdown of the 3. And the third one that I have here in this tie is 1980 Topps Baseball. Now, for 1980, Topps decided to do kind of a retro card, and they were bringing back kind of a 1960s feel. And the problem with older cards like the 1960s is these aren't really stylistic cards. They're nice because they're antiques. Basically, that's the only thing that really carries on most of these cards. A few of them are really good, but you don't have a Buick Roadmaster or a Coca-Cola ad, which these have an elegance that hold up through time. There are only a few cards in the 50s and the 60s that really have that elegance. Most of the others are just old designs, and this card doesn't really benefit much because first off, it has a ribbon that appears on 2 sides of the card, and the ribbon it's okay, but it's a design element that has no strength. And this was a decade that was going to have to be very strong. And the biggest problem that this card has is it has a great big picture, but it has that stupid autograph on it, and card companies often will put autographs on it, and it ruins the card. If you're going to do an autograph, you got to have it bold. You got to make a bold statement, ideally with, like a gold or a silver foil, but you can't do that at this time. So at least if you're going to do an autograph, sell it, own it, make it a big bold autograph. If it's a thin autograph, it looks like it's scribbling on top of the picture, and it ruins the picture. So that's the problem I have with this card. It's a card that I wish was better. I look at it and I go, I want it to be a neat old card. It's just not a neat old card. If it was an old card, it'd be neat. But for 1980, no, that's not the right time. So there's the tie for 5. So what about the fourth worst card? The fourth worst design for me is 1988 Topps Baseball. I hate this card. I've always hated this card, and it used to be the worst card in my opinion, but it's climbed over the years. I've found that some of these cards actually do look pretty nice. Some of them look really nice, and I was very surprised when I read that in 1988, Dan Loving thought that these were actually a great card design because they were retro cards. To me, the card design itself is pretty unforgivable. It's got a sash on the side that has the name. That's kind of a cop-out approach, and the big bold name at the top, it either works or it doesn't work. This card is all about the picture, and the name at the top, if the name works in conjunction with everything, then it can really build a great combination. But if it doesn't, like with Tony Gwynn, that blue of the Padres name is really terrible, and then everything else is too brown on the card, and it's just ruined. And that's a common problem with these cards. So while you have Nolan Ryan and you have Cal Ripken Jr., you have a couple of players that really do come out well in these cards, too many of them are just lost. And overall across the set, it's more about the few cards that work rather than the many cards that fail. But like I said, this was the card that I had the most difficult time with early on, and over time I've been growing on it. So down the road, I may actually move this out of this list. We'll see how that goes. But right now, this is, to me, number 4. Number 3 is going back to football, and that's 1980 Topps. This card design is actually better than I can justify. The problem with 1980 Topps was that prior to 1982, Topps did not have a relationship with the NFL properties. So that means that they could never put the logo on any of their cards. So anytime there was a helmet, the helmet was airbrushed. And the problem for that is it looks dumb. Now, most of the time it's not that big of a deal because they primarily did portraits. But if they had a playoff card or an in-action card, then it always looked kind of weird. But in 1980, for whatever reason, they started doing helmets everywhere, all throughout this set. And if you look at Ahmad Rashad, it looks terrible. If you look at Harper, it looks terrible. And it is so many of them. And the problem that they have in this particular set is when there's no logo on the helmet, it just seems rounder. And because of that, the whole card, every round portion of the card seems rounder. And it becomes an annoying quality to these cards, and it ruins them. So while there are some cards that look okay, by and large, this set is annoyingly round. And then for number 2, this is a card that really should be number 1. It's just that I really hate number 1. But number 2 is Sportflix, and Sportflix doesn't even have a good back to save it. But what's the problem with Sportflix? There's no design. There is no design. And these guys have done good designs. Back in the 70s when they were doing cards for, say, Kellogg's, they actually put strong design elements on them, and they looked pretty good. And then, of course, when the technology caught up in the 1990s, those cards were really dynamic too. But here they didn't even try for a design. They just have a picture. 2 pictures, 3 pictures, and you flip back and forth, and it's a neat little gimmick. I give them credit for the gimmick. The gimmick's pretty cool, but if you're going to do a set, then the gimmick is lost because you just get a page of gray cards. Most of the cards are like between the various images. They don't really look good. The images are all kind of washed out because of the plastic, and in a binder, forget it. These should not go into a binder. If you're going to put one on display, it doesn't read. The only way these work is to pick up and look at the flipping images and enjoy it in that way. It's a gimmick for kids and it's nothing else, and it really bothers me. And it's every single year. They didn't fix this in Sportflix in the 80s, and that really bothers me. These cards, I can't even say they should be better. I don't know why they kept making them. If they made them just 86, that'd be fine. Just 86 and 87, okay, but they kept making them. they're lousy, really lousy. But they're not lousy enough to top my number one, which is 1981-82 Topps basketball. And Topps suffered purgatory of a decade of not doing basketball because they ended wrong. Now, it's not the actual reason, but it sure seems like it. These cards are, to me, they're vile. The cards actually have good pictures, and it's a big open space with a nice thin border around the outside with a little color accent that really makes these cards work, and the backs are great. The problem is they have that big color burst. It's an explosion of color, and it's literally a burst or an explosion. It has jagged lines all around the outside. It's not designed in any other way. It is a big, bold statement of, hey, look at this color patch with name, position, etc. Now, in the 70s, this would have been tough, but this happened right when disco was dying, and both of those needed to die. The 70s card concept needed to die. It had its time. It was over. And Topps, even in 1980-81, they made a really good card, a really cool card. Everything was miniature. Most of the time when something's miniature, it looks better. And these cards were fantastic. And then in 81-82, what was that? I want to see the picture. I can't see the picture because there's that big stinking patch of color, and I hate it. Really hate those cards. I would be very surprised if over time this moved out of this particular position. I want it to move out because, again, the pictures are great. I really do feel so. But it's the cardinal sin when a border overpowers the rest of the card and ruins it. So for me, that's the number one worst card of the 1980s. Now, I'm sure that some of you may have different opinions. It's perfectly fine for you to be wrong by that, but that's what the comment section is for, to have a big conversation, and we all have different opinions, and they evolve over time, and I'm really curious to hear how you feel. How many of you champion getting 88 Topps baseball out of the cellar, or the fact that I didn't have Fleer or Don Russ in here, it was kind of tough to narrow it down. You know, what are your takes? I want to hear about that. And definitely make sure to check out my other videos. Subscribe to check out my videos as they come out. Don't forget to ring the bell in order to get notified about it. And I hope that this was pretty fun. And thank you very much for watching.